If you're a movie fan, you've been around to see the rise of an eventual dominance of the superhero blockbuster. If you're a DC fan like me, you'll be frustrated at the current state of DC movies. From Man of Steel to Justice League, only Wonder Woman has been an unabashed smash hit. But even so, it's trapped in a universe that doesn't seem to know what to do with itself. If you love these characters and love this world, the yearning for truly great cinematic experiences with those elements is almost unbearable. Whether Warner Brothers gets their act together or not, what if I told you there is a place where these stories have flourished? Where Batman and Superman have met in a story that wasn't convoluted and overly serious? What if I told you there was a DC universe out there that was masterfully constructed and did its great characters justice? If you're an adult or a child, a diehard fanboy or a curious newcomer, you're doing yourself a true disservice if you don't dive into the greatness that is the DC animated universe. As I've grown up, my favourite superhero has bounced around between Spider-Man, Batman and Superman, and while I was certainly familiar with their big screen adventures, I was far from a fan of either the Marvel or DC universe. That wasn't until I was in my teens and started properly watching one of the greatest animated TV shows of all time. Batman the Animated Series began in 1992 and is hands down the best incarnation of Batman ever depicted outside of the comics. Its gorgeous production and excellent writing led the producing force of Bruce Timm, among others, to spin off into Superman the Animated Series, The New Batman Adventures, Batman Beyond, Justice League Unlimited, and many more. Despite the unfortunate knee-jerk reaction that this stuff is just for kids, upon closer examination, this small-screen universe of interconnected shows and standalone movies is still to this day the absolute gold standard of a DC universe. On previous editions of this wee show of mine, I often break down my thesis into small sections. However, the DC animated universe coalesces to such a successful extent that it's difficult to know where to begin. Even after the success of the MCU, it is truly awe-inspiring just how well these shows and movies fit together so effortlessly. Obviously, a winning philosophy is ensuring each show is actually good on its own before expanding the universe, but once it does start expanding, it does so in surprising and clever ways. Batman the Animated Series is simply brilliant in and of itself, and is effectively self-contained. If the rest of the universe never existed, this would still stand on its own. But when Superman the Animated Series comes along, suddenly the inner child jumps with joy as we're introduced to the Flash and Green Lantern within Superman stories. And by the time the Justice League shows start, characters from comics simply show up without prior introduction. And it's remarkable how well it actually works. We don't need a show or even an episode to introduce many of these characters. We don't need origins or exposition dumps. Simply through natural dialogue and visuals, a brand new viewer can come to understand everything they need to know about a character with amazing ease. Jon Stewart, Green Lantern and Hawkgirl have arguably become more popular than their traditional counterparts thanks to this show, and they just appear in the first episode of Justice League. But this astonishing feat is a testament to just how well the creative team behind each show understand the characters they're writing for. These shows contain my favourite versions of these characters. While Chris Reeve is and always will be the best Superman, and his first movie will probably always be the best superhero movie of all time, the Superman across these shows is given frankly brilliant material to work with. A perfect balance is struck between his golden age cleanliness and his more complex moral struggles to deliver emotionally engaging and thrilling stories, not to mention a genuinely likable and human personality. Getting Superman so right is so deceptively difficult. It's the main reason we still only have one truly great Superman movie, even after 40 damn years. Even weaker characters from the comics are transformed into interesting three-dimensional people. This is the reason Jon Stewart and Hawkgirl have become as popular as they are. Their strong and distinctive personalities, not to mention their romantic dynamic, is really the heartfelt cornerstone of Justice League and Unlimited. The character writing is so strong here that brand new original characters created just for these shows, such as Harley Quinn, have become DC mainstays to an absurdly popular degree. And don't even get me started on how shit your pants fantastic this universe's Batman is. It's the best Batman ever. I mean, there is no question about this, or at least there shouldn't be. Something which annoys me about the fandom surrounding Batman is how stupendously seriously he is taken sometimes. Sure, Batman deals with some dark subject matter, but can we please stop with the near constant Frank Miller worshipping? This Batman is able to preserve all the psychological and moral complexity while still being, shock gasp, honest to goodness fun. Because in spite of all the Ayn Rand bullshit and straight up psychopathic sadism, this show understands that despite it all, Batman is a true hero and he should behave as such. Although Supes is my favourite character in the DC universe, this version of Batman is definitive, the highest bar that all other versions should be measured up to. Perhaps it was because the original animated series was basically the inception for this entire animated enterprise, but this version of Batman basically became the touchstone for the entire universe. Although my admiration for Superman and how spot on he was depicted in these shows is self-evident, the Batman of the DCAU is the character everyone likes and everyone can agree on. He has the most complete arc, the most complex stories, and is the only character out of the universe to get a theatrically released movie, Batman Mask of the Phantasm, which after the first few seconds of the score alone establishes itself as one of the best things in the fucking universe, fictional or otherwise. And that is to say nothing of the voice that needs no introduction.
I am vengeance. I am the night. I am Batman!
It's sort of become a meme when joking about the Batman voice, but I find it strange how people often go for a gravelly, throat cancery sound, whereas Kevin Conroy does none of that. His voice is commanding, convicted, and intimidating. The voice which is unmistakably that character. But Conroy wasn't alone in crafting this performance, because the entire DCAU has to thank voice director Andrea Romano. The casting, directing, and producing of these vocal performances are some of the greatest feats in animated history. Mark Hamill's Joker is just as legendary as Conroy's Batman. Tim Daly and George Newborn both bring Superman's voice a warmth and presence, perfectly evoking the qualities I mentioned earlier. Michael Ironside's Darkseid, Clancy Brown's Lex Luthor, there are just too many to name. The genius move of having each actor record the scenes together as opposed to separate booths at separate times creates a chemistry and naturalism in the dialogue which makes most other animated shows feel stale and artificial by comparison. Although they're all cartoons, these characters seem like real feeling and thinking people. The animation style in particular is simply beautiful in its simplicity. I'm about to say something incendiary with regards to the 90s X-Men cartoon, and if you love it, fine, but I was honestly never a fan of that show's animation style. Because of the attempted semi-sort of realism and texturing, movement often felt sluggish and restrained, especially during action sequences. Almost as if the animators had too much detail to fill in that they didn't have as much time to put into it. But Bruce Timm's simpler, blockier style of fridge-sized torsos and lamp-sized waists allowed for a fluidity and speed not seen outside the Fleischer Superman cartoons. Which, on a side note, look how gorgeous the Fleischer Superman cartoon serials hold up after all this time. It's really amazing. While the movement kept things exciting, the artistic craft in this animation also created some of the most iconic still images. Excellent compositions, dramatic lighting, and wonderfully faithful character designs. It's this animation style which also makes the universe itself feel so expansive and bustling with life. The gothic architecture of Gotham City, the pulp retro-futurism of Metropolis, the 80s-like fantasy creatures and the operatic space vistas. A broad and beautiful canvas, the perfect setting for great storytelling. The majority of the DCAU is built on enjoyable episodic adventures, but for me the longer-running arcs truly showcase the talent of the writing teams. The DCAU constructed its long-running arcs like a Greek comedian weaves a joke. You don't even know what's being built up before your eyes until it emerges. The awesome spectacle of Superman and the League's conflict with Darkseid, the fascinating and thematically powerful Cadmus and President Luthor storylines, the Asimov-esque version of Brainiac who can never be defeated, these larger arcs are fiendishly clever in how elements from seemingly episodic entries come back to inform on a larger plot. These overarching stories provide the great material for Superman I mentioned earlier. For one thing, Darkseid became his de facto nemesis rather than Lex Luthor, but we'll get to him in a second. Darkseid represented an immediate and believable physical threat which few villains ever convincingly do. Michael Ironside's performance oozes power and charisma and ego. He bested Superman so badly in their first encounter, their conflicts develop a personal edge which puts Superman in danger of letting his desire for getting even above his normal moral code. The Cadmus storyline once again preserves the character we all know, but at the same time he becomes shocked, guilty, and angry when his enemies end up having an actual point. The vocal performance and animation style perfectly depict the internal struggle as he and other League members come to the realization of how far their own hubris has taken them. It's in both of these storylines that Superman's usual nemesis, Lex Luthor, establishes himself as one of the most layered and intriguing characters in the entire DC canon. Beginning as a heartless businessman twixt mad scientist, by the conclusion of Unlimited, this version of Lex Luthor has battled wits against some of the most incomprehensibly powerful entities to ever exist, and still come out on top. He's someone whose ego is matched only by their immense intellect and will to survive and thrive. We've already established how much of a threat Darkseid is to Superman, and Lex Luthor is just going to go toe-to-toe with the guy. Charming but untrustworthy, tragic but terrifying. This version of Lex Luthor is astonishing in his dimensionality, and much like Conroy's Batman, is the bar for all other interpretations of the character. What I also appreciate about the DCAU though is how stylistically broad it is at times. Jumping around the DCAU can take you from the pulp-inspired adventures of Superman to the anime-inspired thrills of Batman Beyond. Hell, the Justice League even battles Cthulhu in one episode. Speaking metatextually, the DCAU is also monstrously successful at capturing the magic of its source material for exactly the same reason the current DCEU has been so blundering and disastrous. Hey, so I just want to jump in here for a second to do some preemptive damage control. If you look back far enough on my channel, you'll probably come across a video titled Batman v Superman is Awesome, a contemporary review of mine shortly after that movie came out. And while I placed an annotation over it to adjust my statement in relation to the Ultimate Cut, which I also hinted at in my early attempt at a video essay on the universe in general, my feelings on Man of Steel and Batman v Superman have changed dramatically since then. In approaching this very project, I had to confront my complex feelings in relation to the DCEU as it stands, and I have to admit that I was personally blocking out some very valid criticisms of both of these films, which I have now taken on board and reformed my thoughts on them. While I am still perfectly able to enjoy Man of Steel, the thematic goals of its story fall completely flat on its face, and don't pay off in a satisfying way, robbing the ending of what should be an uplifting and inspiring beginning to a modern Superman franchise. I don't hate it, but it seriously screws up in surprisingly sloppy ways. Batman v Superman is still a complete mess, even with the additional footage. While I like many elements of it and appreciate some very noble intentions, in execution it's absurdly self-serious, confused in terms of cultural identity, and many of its prominent dramatic beats are utterly butchered. I think Wonder Woman is the only legitimately great movie in the DCEU so far, and Justice League was fine but nothing special, which is a massive disappointment in and of itself considering it's a Justice League movie and it should be way better than just fine. If you think Man of Steel and BVS are great, cool, but I wanted to address how my feelings on both films have changed in order to assuage any possible accusations of hypocrisy in relation to the next part of this video. The metatextual reason why the DCAU is often held up as the blueprint for how to fix and improve the current DCEU is because, unlike the live-action counterpart, the animated version of these properties actively reveres and celebrates its comic book roots, while the recent DC movies seem to be overcompensating because of embarrassment with regards to those same origins. Man of Steel seems so shameful of the inherently campy, colourful and silly Superman lineage that it does everything in its power to try and distance itself from that same lineage. From the costume redesign to the colder colour palette, the strangely brutal feeling action sequences, and the frequent brooding of Superman himself, it feels a need to kowtow to an audience which wouldn't have liked Superman regardless of any adaptation. The same goes for Batman v Superman, which is so aggressively downbeat and mean-spirited in how serious it wants to take all the sound and fury, it ends up circling back around to look laughably juvenile. The DC animated universe, on the other hand, takes the exact opposite approach. It acknowledges numerous times how daft a lot of this stuff is, yet at the same time it's clear how much fun the creators behind these shows are having adapting and homaging some of the source material's best stories, characters, and iconography. One of my favourite Justice League episodes ever is Legends, where several League members are flung into a parallel dimension populated by characters from comic books Green Lantern used to read as a kid. Much of the episode is the regular League members bouncing off their more Golden Age counterparts while also uncovering a mystery brewing beneath the world around them. Not only is this story a brilliant nod to the continuity solution DC Comics actually used back in the day, but it also has loads of fun contrasting how superheroes were back then compared to how they are in the more modern context. While the Justice Guild is sillier and naive, the core components of their actual heroism are readily acknowledged to still be relevant and are celebrated rather than being outright mocked or dismissed because of surface level cheesiness. And Justice League especially is full of these inspired repurposings of comic book stories as well as the lore surrounding them. Something like For the Man Who Has Everything is adapted almost verbatim, while The Death of Superman is reconfigured into Hereafter, a story which holds up far better than the actual Death of Superman arc. Amidst all this cleverness, however, the focus always remains on the characters, giving them great material and making the audience care as much about them and their struggles as they do about the themes of their stories. To tell you the whole truth, I haven't even seen all of this stuff. I'm yet to view a bunch of standalone movies and the vast majority of more obscure shows like Static Shock. But one of the best things about all of this, Warner Brothers Animation is still going, and its output is still strong. Sure, there's failings like the Killing Joke adaptation and the early New 52 stuff wasn't great, but Batman the Brave and the Bold, Justice League Action, Flashpoint Paradox, Assault on Arkham, and even more new editions still being made. Although it's not the same continuity anymore and the first incarnation of this animated universe has since closed its doors, that doesn't mean it should ever be forgotten. The DC animated universe is currently the best version of this wonderful world of heroes outside of its source material, and it certainly tops the current big screen version. But if the DCEU does reboot and a new team starts fresh, there is no better place to draw from as influence. These handful of shows demonstrate a passion for these characters and stories that elevates it far beyond mere kids stuff. If a new slate of live-action DC movies going forward stopped taking cues from hollow stunt events from the 90s and flashes in the pan from Frank Miller, but instead looked to the spectacular worlds, great character writing, well-crafted stories, and optimistic passion of the astounding achievement that was the DC animated universe for their inspiration, then I truly look forward to the next time I sit down in front of a cinema screen to watch. And that is why the DC animated universe is awesome. Thanks for watching, guys. This took a lot of work to put together, and I hope my regular subscribers enjoyed the stray away from sci-fi TV and into superhero stuff. If you'd like to help me make more of these, you can join me on my Patreon, where you can see videos like this early, in fact all my videos early, and hear about a ton of other projects that I have going on, including a sci-fi short film and a sci-fi novel that I'm going to self-publish soon. Until then, have a good one, guys, and as always, live long and prosper.